All right, let's get right into this. Today, we are opening up a truly chilling case file in this explainer. We're looking at a deeply disturbing sequence of events that reportedly went down at the famously luxurious Langham Hotel over in London. Now listen, whether you're a hardcore believer in the supernatural or a strict skeptic, the breakdown of this specific incident it's absolutely fascinating. Why? Because it challenges literally everything we think we know about evidence, psychology, and logic. We're going to walk through the timeline, dig into a really bizarre evidence log, and look at the terrifying conclusion of what actually happened inside room 333. So grab a seat and, yeah, maybe leave the lights on for this one.
So, to really understand this case, we have to start with our subject. Enter Annie. She's a 25-year-old British journalist and a super experienced paranormal investigator. But here's the absolute key detail you need to keep in mind. Annie wasn't at the Langham Hotel to find ghosts. Not at all. She was there to debunk them. She actually arrived in London with the specific goal of shooting a documentary to expose fake hauntings. She had this really successful track record of unmasking frauds, proving that, things that go bump in the night usually have a very mundane scientific explanation. She is strictly 100% logical. Okay, let's dive into this timeline so we can get a real sense of the grim history she was walking right into. According to the source material, decades ago, back during the Victorian era, a doctor and his new wife checked into room 333 for their honeymoon. But just hours later, a horrific tragedy unfolded. The doctor brutally murdered his wife inside that very room, and immediately afterward, he took his own life. The legend actually states that ever since that night, his restless spirit has haunted the space. Fast forward to our modern timeline, and we have Annie. She arrives at this antique, highly luxurious hotel, totally unfazed by all this dark history, and she is determined to prove it's nothing more than an old urban legend. This setup right here perfectly illustrates the core conflict. On one hand, we've got Annie's mindset, right? Entirely evidence-based, totally reliant on cameras, microphones, and rational thinking. Her plan was incredibly straightforward. Just spend one single night in room 333, record the silence, pack up, and move on to the next case. But waiting for her is the reality of the hotel itself. It's an intensely dark, totally illogical environment that operates by its own terrifying rules. Essentially, she brought audio recorders to a supernatural knife fight. Annie's reliance on logic is about to be violently tested against a force that literally doesn't care about her equipment. Right from the moment Annie steps foot inside, the environment starts signaling that something is deeply, deeply wrong. The red flags started right at check-in. The literal second Annie requested room 333, the receptionist's welcoming smile just vanished, gone. She silently handed Annie this heavy, outdated physical key, which is highly unusual for a modern luxury hotel, right? And as Annie stepped onto the third floor, the whole atmosphere just plummeted. Empty corridors, faded paintings illuminated by these dim yellow lamps. And when she finally reached the dark polished wood door of room 333, the heavy brass handle was unnervingly freezing cold to the touch. But of course, Annie doesn't care about a creepy vibe. Entering the room, she's greeted by pure darkness. She uses her phone's flashlight to find the switches, and that reveals this imposing Victorian-style room. We're talking a giant king-size bed and a massive full-length mirror directly facing it. And get this, even when her suitcase unexplainably falls over out in the hallway with a loud thud, she remains completely unfazed. She just initiates her systematic setup. Step 1, place the tripod. Step 2, position the camera. Step 3, connect the mic. She is meticulously creating a technological net to capture reality. So the investigation officially begins as the sun sets. It's a chilly November evening. To combat the cold of the room, Annie lights a small fire in the fireplace. She orders a sandwich, eats it on a little sofa tucked in the corner, and gets to work. The camera's rolling, the mic is hot. She opens her laptop and starts doing some deep research into the reported ghost sightings of the Langham Hotel. But she becomes so totally engrossed in her digital data that she doesn't even realize how heavy her eyelids are getting. Surrounded by all her equipment and the warmth of that small fire, Annie accidentally falls asleep. Now, imagine the absolute silence of a dead hallway. And then, suddenly, it's broken by a sharp knock. Sometime later, Annie is suddenly jolted awake by that exact sound at her door. Still half asleep, a little confused, she waits. The knock comes again. But this time, it's accompanied by a man's voice out in the hallway. Just a low, steady whisper stating, "Your room service, madam." Annie is instantly confused, right? She had already received and eaten her sandwich hours ago. Figuring there was just some mix-up with another guest's order, she walks over to the heavy wooden door and looks through the peephole.
Standing out there in the dimly lit corridor is a butler holding a tray covered by a large silver lid. Annie cracks the door open and politely tells the guy that, hey, she didn't order anything. But the butler simply replies that the order is indeed for her. He reaches out, lifts the large lid off the tray, and sitting right there on the plate is her own severed head. Annie lets out this blood-curdling scream. She tightly shuts her eyes in sheer terror. But when she forces her eyes open a second later, the butler's gone, the tray is gone, the long, shadowy corridor is completely and utterly empty.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide, this evidence log, is how her technological safety net completely fails her. Annie slams the door shut, heart absolutely pounding, and immediately runs to her equipment. She relies on logic, right? So she checks the evidence. She pulls the video file from the camera, fully expecting to see footage of the hallway and that butler. But the actual result? The SD card is entirely corrupted, completely unreadable. Panicking now, she checks the highly sensitive voice recorder, expecting to hear the clear knocks in the man's voice. The actual result? The audio file is intact, but the butler's voice is completely gone. All it captured was the sound of the door opening, her own terrified scream, and the door slamming shut. When logic fails like that, pure panic sets in.
It is exactly 1 a.m., and despite the fire still actively burning in the fireplace, the temperature in room 333 is just plummeting. The fire is going, but the room literally feels like an icebox. Annie's logical mind is fracturing at this point, unable to comprehend what she just saw and what her equipment completely failed to capture. She is paralyzed by fear. Trying to ground herself, just trying to snap out of the panic, she walks into the bathroom to wash her face with some cold water. She splashes the water over her face, takes a really deep, shaky breath, and looks up into the bathroom mirror. And there, standing directly behind her shoulder, is a horrifying figure. It's the reflection of a man. His face appears to be actively rotting away. He has these abnormally long nails, and he's wearing torn, deteriorated Victorian-era clothing. The entity raises his hands, his long nails reaching out directly toward Annie's neck as if to strangle her. Annie screams, she spins around to fight off her attacker, and she's just standing in an empty bathroom. There is absolutely no one behind her. That is it. That's the breaking point. The investigation is officially over. Annie scrambles out of the bathroom, frantically grabs whatever belongings she can, and rushes to the main door to escape. She grabs that cold brass handle and pulls, but it's the ultimate nightmare. The heavy, dark wood door is completely jammed. It feels as though someone or something has firmly locked the door from the inside, trapping her inside room 333.
As Annie violently yanks on the handle, just desperately trying to pry the door open, the room's power grid surges. Every single light in room 333 begins to flicker violently, flashing on, flashing off. It creates this terrifying strobe effect across the antique furniture and that massive mirror. And within those flashes of light, she sees him again. Only now the entity is no longer just a reflection. He is physically manifesting right there in the room with her, stepping out of the shadows.
With every single violent flash of the lights, he takes a step closer. Torn Victorian clothes, a stark, unnaturally white body, and piercing, glowing yellow eyes locking directly onto her. The rotting face she saw in the mirror is slowly, methodically closing the distance between them. Trapped against the locked door, Annie begins to scream at the top of her lungs, desperately begging for anyone outside to help her. Down the hall, hotel staff members hear these blood-curdling screams echoing from room 333. They rush to the door, force it open, and burst inside, expecting to find an attacker. But what they actually witness makes their blood run cold. Annie is completely alone in the room, but she isn't safe. She is standing in front of the massive mirror, screaming wildly and violently smashing her own head into the shattered glass. The glass is literally piercing her face. The entity she saw in her mind was physically manifesting through her own possessed actions. The staff rush forward, grabbing her arms and legs, physically pulling a screaming, bleeding Annie away from the broken mirror, until, finally, her body goes completely limp and she faints from the trauma. So the crucial point here is what happens after she wakes up. Annie regains consciousness inside the hotel's medical room. Still terrified, she recounts the entire horrific ordeal to the staff, explaining how this terrifying Victorian man grabbed her head and repeatedly smashed it into the glass. But the staff, they just look at her with absolute dread. They gently explain the horrifying truths behind the legend of room 333.
The violent act Annie was forced to commit against herself, that was the exact modus operandi of the doctor. Smashing her head into the mirror was the precise, brutal method he had used to murder his own wife decades ago in that exact room. The ghost wasn't just scaring Annie, it was forcing her to recreate the original murder. Which brings us to a lingering, deeply unsettling question. Annie survived the night. Her physical wounds healed, and she eventually left the Langham Hotel. But for a strictly logical investigator whose reality was violently hijacked by the inexplicable, the psychological scars absolutely remain. She went in with tripods and logic, and she left with a completely shattered worldview. It really leaves you wondering, when an experience is that deeply terrifying and unexplainable, do you ever truly leave a place like Room 333 behind? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep your logic sharp, but yeah, maybe leave the lights on tonight. I'll see you in the next analysis.